KM is the case study I'll be using for this presentation. He's a 20-year-old Caucasian heterosexual male. Came to the residential program, having been hospitalized after some involvement with the criminal justice system. There was a domestic disturbance at his house, mainly involving him and his family, his parents. The police were called and he was subsequently arrested. Charges are still pending in that case, so he does go to an alternative incarceration program, and they are considering his treatment. That might be a mitigating factor in his case. However, historically, he has had prior involvement with the mental health system. When he was 17, he experienced a psychotic break, exhibiting bizarre behavior. It was paranoid. It was out of the norm for him. And he started to talk about auditory and visual hallucinations he was having. So he was placed in the Yale observation unit, and he was eventually released. His own words, he believes this episode was due to marijuana use. He was released, and he was put into one of those early psychosis programs. They discharged him pretty quick on that because he wasn't showing signs of psychosis anymore. Prior to the arrest, he had overdosed on Xanax. He claims it wasn't a suicide attempt. He just forgot how many he took. But that was about 2 weeks before the current incident. KM is a likable guy. He's got some strengths. And these can be accessed to help increase his treatment outcomes. He's intelligent. He's done well in school. He was able to graduate high school. He did attend college for 1 semester. His grades weren't bad, but he says he lost interest. It's believed this could be due to the marijuana use. He's social. He's well-liked by his peers and staff within the residential program. He has family support from both mother and father, even after the domestic incident, as well as his sister and brother. He's also held part-time employment for a previous year. Some of the challenges and treatment interfering behaviors he may have include his impulsivity and emotional dysregulation that he has surrounding his use, which was primarily what one of the domestic disturbances was about. It had to do with his CBD pods for his vaping pen. However, we suspect they were actually THC vape pods. He struggles with attention and shows signs that processing of information may be a little bit irregular also. He recently underwent some in-depth psychological testing, in which he performed a number of clinical interviews and exams. Diagnostically, he seemed to meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder and cannabis use disorder. So CBT is a therapy that's recommended for the ASP, and motivational interviewing is the recommended treatment for his cannabis use disorder. These treatment modalities can be done at the same time, but in this case, the goal is to continue to focus on his use of THC to work towards reducing or stopping that behavior. So in terms of MI, that's the target behavior we'll be looking at. This will be done through weekly therapy sessions using MI as a strategy. The expected length of treatment is 8 to 12 weeks. A little background on motivational interviewing. It started by when William Miller and Stephen Rolnick got together. Miller wrote the first paper on it to primarily address drinking. Stephen Rolnick read the paper, and they ended up meeting together. I believe it was in Australia, where they started to expand it into substance use also. So this theory and this practice, this intervention, is also being used because of its efficacy rates and its outcomes with people with substance abuse and alcohol. It's actually been placed into a lot of healthcare settings now as well to help people reach goals as far as diet, healthcare, healthy eating habits, things like that. So there's been over 350 clinical trials. So it does have a strong research base to show that this is a really good intervention. And there's a lot of meta-analytical reviews as well. So with any good intervention, of course, there's going to be some theoretical concepts behind it. The one behind motivational interviewing is really focused on being person-centered. It's a very person-centered approach, much like Carl Rogers. Um, what's a little bit different than Roger's approach, though, is it's also goal directed. Whereas Carl Rogers was a little bit just more person centered and where the person wanted to go. With MI, it's a very goal directed thing. So you're trying to find out why someone would want to change a behavior, start a behavior, stop a behavior. There is a reason to practice the intervention. So now it isn't the responsibility of the person working with the individual. They need to listen. They need to provide support. They're really kind of helping to guide that person into that direction of behavior change. So they attempt to encourage change through directing the client to move from a state of ambivalence into their own motivation. And one of the important concepts with that is rolling with resistance. So I know we frequently may want to resort to what I might even mention later in this presentation is known as the writing reflex, which is our desire to put our expectations on our client. In other words, we think you should stop doing A, B, and C because it's bad for you. With MI, we really want that individual to understand why they want to change their behavior for themselves. It has nothing to do with us. So an important technique is going to be to roll with this type of resistance. And I do find myself having to do that with this client. So again, interaction with the individual that you're working with when using the MI approach, it works best when you do focus on a specific behavior. So again, with Carl Rogers being person-centered, this is also goal-directed. Identify the behavior, and that's when it'll work the best. So you're going to look for change talk and sustain talk, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation. But an important part of the interaction with clients is going to be the style. So the style can influence what is going to lead to that change talk more so than that sustain talk. For example, if the practitioner's style, if they're really struggling to roll with the resistance of the individual, they might hear more sustain talk than change talk. They're going to fall into that counter of, I want to do it my way, while the practitioner is going to, you should do it this way. So the better we roll with resistance, the better we have the ability to do that. We should hear a little bit more change talk, and I'm hoping to see that with this client. Hearing change is a really important concept in motivational interviewing, what we were just talking about, being able to identify preparatory change talk or mobilizing change talk. So preparatory change talk is someone thinking about changing. They're talking about it's pre-change. They really haven't made that decision. So there is an acronym to remember both of these. So for preparatory, it's DARN, and for mobilizing, it's CAT. So for any of you feline lovers out there, you might be able to remember it that way. But preparatory change talk is desire, ability, reasons, or need. So if you look at those statements down there, desire, I would like to do something. Oftentimes it might be followed with some type of sustained talk. So, I would like to change, but all my friends do it. I'm sure I could if I wanted to, but I really don't want to. So we don't want to really focus on the sustain part. We want to focus on that preparatory change part. I'm sure I could if I wanted to. That's where we want to focus our moving the client towards. So mobilizing change talk, you're a little farther along here. Here it's commitment, activation, and taking steps. So when you hear some of this, you're really moving them in the right direction, or they're moving themselves in the right direction. Commitment, I'll stop next week. Activation, I told my boss I would stop on a certain day. So then you want to start exploring that, and you want to start reinforcing that and affirming that. MI trainers give us another acronym to use to help us to do that and help us to lead people. How do we get them to talk about change? How do we get them to share with us? So the acronym is OARS, which is open-ended questions, affirmations, listening reflectively, and summarizing. And I just want to qualify, asking someone how you feel. People say yes or no questions are open-ended. If it's a yes or no question, it's a closed-ended question, right? How do you feel doesn't ask that, but that's still a closed-ended question because they could say fine. How's everything going? Good. So the whole idea is to try to ask questions that are going to elicit answers that are going to really provide a little bit more information. So tell me what it is you like about your drinking or your drug use or your bad activities. unhealthy activities. What are some of the activities you do with your family when you are home? Tell me about any involvement you may have had with the justice system. That's one question that I'm looking to use with this particular client, given his history of recently having had some police contact and some justice involvement. Scaling is a really good method that could be used during an interview, whether it's with MI, CBT, or any other technique, actually. It's just a good way to elicit information from somebody. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you think you would like to change your behavior is one way to ask it. But you can even elicit feelings on that. You can elicit behaviors. You know, how often are you doing this on a scale of 1 to 5? How many days a week are you doing it? It'll give you a lot of really good information to process with your client and to help you to understand where they're coming from. So for MI, though, they talk about using a backward question as a follow-up. So you said a 4, why not a 1? The idea is that doing this, it'll produce some of that DARN in the DARN CAT acronym, some of that preparatory change talk, desire, ability, reason, or need. So you want to listen to those responses and see if you can then start moving that person into sustained change talk. The A in the OR skills is affirmations. As you're working with an individual, it's one of the things I like about MI. On top of it being client-centered, it's also strengths-based. So, you do want to appreciate people's behavior. You do want to affirm when you hear, specifically when you hear that change talk. When you hear a client start working towards whether it's preparatory or sustain, whether they start talking about, making those changes, you want to affirm that. And some other stuff that you see them doing. But some tips on that is specify specifically the behavior you're affirming. And try to use I statements. So you can see down below, you see him have a lot of adversity, yet you still manage to stay connected with your support network. That shows real persistence. So in other words, instead of saying, I'm really proud of you for doing this, you're really putting it on them. You're really letting them know that it's them that are doing it. You seem to have had a lot of adversity lately. Even though you are angry about being in this program, you provide positive feedback to your housemates during group. That's something that I wanted to point out to you. And you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is real. So, you don't want to try to affirm something that isn't really going to be well received by them, or they're going to see as shallow. So anything you do affirm for them, you want that to be something that they could really grab onto. The reflection skill is part of the ORS skill in motivational interviewing. It's a way of reframing what someone tells you, but it's not necessarily repeating what they say, and it's not summarizing, which we'll talk about next. What's really going to help with this is reflective listening and trying to hear what the person is trying to say underneath their statement. So you'll know you're getting close if someone starts nodding heads when you're reflecting back to them what you hear them saying. So the benefits is it adds clarification, understanding, and it definitely helps to build rapport because the person will know you're listening. And you're not just hearing their words, but you're listening really to what they're saying. Also, it allows them to hear their own arguments. So when I'm working with this individual, if he says, I'm not sure I need to quit smoking weed, I might say, you're not sure you want to stop altogether. So I'm just reflecting back what he's saying. That's a simple reflection. A complex reflection would be if he said, I'm not sure I need to quit smoking weed. And I said, sounds like you don't think things are really bad enough yet. You haven't had enough consequences that you think it's that much of a problem. So you're not ready to stop yet. So ideally, you want to do reflections as a statement and not as a question. So this shows a little bit more about simple reflecting and complex reflecting. The simple reflecting techniques is just repeating back what they say verbatim and rephrasing maybe what they say. So again, like a simple, if he said, I don't think I want to stop smoking pot, I could say, sounds like you're not ready to give up smoking altogether. So I'm kind of rephrasing what he's saying. And then the complex reflecting is paraphrasing, an educated guess at what he means underneath. It's also pulling in feelings and putting those into meaning behind the words. And then double-sided reflections catches both sides of the ambivalence. So that would be, sounds like you're upset about the problems that smoking pot is causing at home with your family, but you're concerned because you might not have a social life if you quit altogether. Summarizing is the S in the OR skills. So there's different types of summarizing. There's collecting, linking, and transitional summaries. So collecting is presenting back what was said, and that's really just as you're listening, as in I'm listening to this guy talk. I'm hopefully going to be collecting information, and at some point in the session, I'm going to identify, let's review what you just said. So you came in, you said that you had a domestic problem at home where you got into some trouble with the cops. I hear you saying that you think that marijuana might have been a cause of that, but I also hear you saying that you don't think you need to stop because it might impact your social life. So now linking is contrasting current information that you may have told me previously. So you're feeling angry about being here maybe because the last time you feel like you tried to quit smoking weed, it didn't work. And so now you're upset that you have to be here. Which is something he had mentioned, is that he had tried treatment before and it didn't work. So transitional summaries is when you gather info and you're going to move into the direction of the changed behavior. So you've heard some change talk, you've moved from sustained talk, and hopefully you can then start moving the transitional into, let's summarize what we said, but let's talk about the plan moving forward. So, and that could look something like, it seems like you're ready to try something different. Where do you see yourself taking it from here? And this concludes the presentation on motivational interviewing intervention.